Hello there, and welcome to the People and Systems Report Launch webinar. Terence, I'll just ask you if you could just confirm that you can hear me okay? Great. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for attending today. We've got a great panel of participants today to discuss some insights from the report we released over the last week, which has had some very, very exciting feedback. And so appreciate the time today from some panelists to discuss some of those insights and talk a little bit about what that means for sustainability officers and corporates more broadly in the lead up to the Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards program this coming year. My name is Nick Camper. I'm the CEO of Purpose Bureau. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands from which we are coming together today. In Sydney, that's the Gadigal people. We acknowledge their deep connection to land, water, and culture and pay our respects to their elders past and present. I'd like to begin just briefly by introducing our panelists. We've got Terence Jayarathne, who holds many hats, but in his capacity as professor at Monash University, attends today, and also in his capacity as co-author of the report that we'll be discussing today as well. Terence, of course, has many other hats, including being chairman of Foresight, a sustainability special consulting business, and also on the board of the AUASB. We've got Karen McWilliams, who runs a fairly substantive advocacy program over at Chartered Accountants ANZ. Many people know Karen in the industry, and we're very thankful for having her here today to talk about some of the insights that we've got in the report. And we've, of course, got Richard Evans, who's the Chief CEO of Talent Nation. Richard also is quite well known in the industry and runs Talent Nation, who I don't know, I assume is involved with more than half of corporate sustainability personnel initiatives these days, and has kind of been through many reporting cycles as part of his work in the industry as well. So thanks everyone for joining. Just a little bit on the agenda today. So I'll run through so I'm Nick, I'm the host. I'll be running through some insights on the report. So I'll do a 10-minute recap, provide a little bit of context about how that report came to be, how what those insights have, what insights we've uncovered, and then we'll, after about 10 minutes, we'll open up the panel, and Terence will step in and ask some questions of the broader panel, but will no doubt have some thoughts of his own. A real quick introduction of what Purpose Bureau is. And sorry, I've just been reminded, I've just got to remind everyone that there will be audience questions. You can submit this via the Q&A feature, which should be at the bottom of your screen. Terence will be sure to allocate about 10 minutes at the back end of the presentation or today's session to be able to go through audience questions. No doubt if questions are coming through throughout his section of questions, he may integrate those as well. A recording of the webinar will be published on the Purpose Bureau YouTube channel after the event, and we'll send a direct link to the report. Not sure how much activity the Purpose Bureau YouTube channel will be getting, but no doubt you'll also be emailed directly via some outreach which will summarize the insights of the reports as well. So, my name's Nick, I'm the CEO of Purpose Bureau, and for those that don't know, Purpose Bureau is an ESG bureau. We essentially monitor all businesses globally, so that includes private and public businesses, as well as government organizations, and organize thousands of private and public data assets to form a view on any business from an ESG perspective. And so that view in particular is used across the climate reporting space for organizations to be able to better understand the value chain emissions of the emissions of their value chain, so specifically Scope 3, and climate risk in their value chain. So having granular data to understand the transition and physical risk of businesses in their supply chain or their business customer base. We work quite widely with corporates across globally, but in particular in Asia Pacific, where a lot of organizations are reporting under ASRS as well. We partnered with Monash University. It was about 6 months from yesterday to commence an initiative to undertake an initiative to understand which companies report under Group 1, 2, and 3 under ASRS or are due to report, and better understand who those businesses are so that we can help the people informing the debate around how guidance should be issued over the coming years, more about the types of businesses that will need guidance. We did that in about September last year to a lot of quite wide reception. We did an inventory stock take of Group 1 companies and found a couple of really key critical insights that are foundational to some of the work we did in the report that we'll be discussing today. I think on a high level, the key ones are an initial sizing of these cohorts. So under the Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards regime that organisations will have to report against, in Group 1, we estimated that there's approximately 1,100 businesses in Group 1. We estimated a little bit less than that for Group 2, which of course will be scheduled to report in the following financial year. And in Group 3, we estimated approximately there were 6,500 businesses. So all in all, by our current estimates, and no doubt this will change, about 8,000 businesses will be reporting over the course of the next few years under ASRS. We did some industry segmentation insights and a whole bunch more, but one of the key things we looked at and unpicked was trying to identify and profile how prepared businesses are in the lead up to ASRS. This was, of course, prior to the start of this calendar year, so in 2025, and we were looking at leading indicators or insights to understand the maturity of businesses' internal systems and reporting regimes. And so that included looking at whether those businesses had published disclosures before, whether those businesses had those disclosures audited, and it also looked at dimensions such as what kind of reporting frameworks businesses reported against. So we did that last year, and what we had an opportunity at the start of this year to collaborate with Talent Nation, who you may be familiar with in terms of the insights that Talent Nation come out each year. Certainly many sustainability professionals I speak to anxiously awaiting for Talent Nation's latest survey report each year, around February each year, where the report on trends on salary trends on professionals in this industry, but then also really key insights on how those businesses saw their own sustainability program evolving over the next 12 months with respect to a variety of different things, including increasing headcount and resourcing inside organizations, including investment in data and technology systems, and a variety of other insights as well. So we thought it was a great opportunity to lean into that very rich data that Richard Evans and Talent Nation compile each year, where they survey thousands of professionals across Australia and connect up these two bodies of work, which is really being able to say, okay, we've got a good view of how businesses or how mature businesses are when it comes to their reporting requirements, in the form of understanding how that may inform their level of the quality of their reporting under ASRS, and connect that with Talent Nation's very rich data set of understanding how businesses are expecting to resource up, how businesses are looking to understand how their data and technology investment stacks up against that increase in headcount, and some of the challenges they've got in reporting. So we released a report, and no doubt encourage you all to have a look at some of the key insights offline. Many of you, I'm sure, already will have. I just wanted to talk just briefly in this moment before we spoke with the broader panelists about some of the key insights from this report that we identified. I'll just ask, here we are. So this key insights page is just directly from our report, and I'll be using it just to walk through some of these high-level insights. I think the first insight that we ran that was interesting was just trying to take a stock take of how many Group 1 companies have a sustainability professional. Now, we had a look at the types of sustainability professionals or expertise that businesses, of course, can hire for. That'll include people exclusively with a sustainability background, may include people in finance that have trained up to be in sustainability related roles. What we're interested in is who is dedicating a role to the work of sustainability reporting or ESG initiatives more broadly. And so the answer was, by our count, 74% of Group 1 companies had a sustainability professional. From there, what we began to do, of course, were looking at how the size of those teams and how that might influence how prepared or how mature organizations are in their reporting phases. And so I think critically, one of the very interesting insights was, of course, and as you'd expect, a lot more businesses had exhibited audited climate disclosures that had sustainability professionals. So we were able to see that more than half of businesses that have one sustainability professional were 50% more likely to be well prepared for ASRS this upcoming reporting period. What we were also able to investigate is looking at businesses where they've got more than one person. And so we were interested in the relationship between going from a team of one to perhaps a team of three or a team of five, and understanding if that influences the level of maturity or preparedness that organizations have. And so we certainly saw organizations that have more than one sustainability professional being more prepared, but it certainly wasn't at the same degree as having just one. And so the way I kind of were thinking about it is resourcing the team is a must, but at some point it becomes important in and amongst many other things as you're looking to grow that team further beyond that. We also looked at, as I mentioned, the ESG data, the investment that organizations have made in their data and technology systems. So through a combination, of course, of Purpose Bureau's data more broadly, but Talent Nation's data on understanding which organizations had invested in ESG platforms. So for instance, might be carbon accounting platforms, could of course be ESG versions of procurement systems or ERMs and a whole bunch of different systems that organizations use from a data management standpoint, accounting or procurement. We had a look at whether organizations investing in those systems meant that they were more likely to be more mature on their reporting journey. And just like sustainability professionals, there was quite a stark correlation between organizations that had invested in ESG tech and their outcome on performance in a similar magnitude as having one sustainability professional. So more than organizations with ESG technology had more than 56% of the time were more prepared than other organizations. Certainly this was the case when we looked at organizations that had a lot more exposure to scope 3 emissions, so value chain emissions and climate risk. Those organizations were more likely to be identifying data availability and integrity as their biggest challenge, and were also more likely to be investing in data and technology across the broader economy as well. There were some interesting numbers when we began to look at which industries were very well prepared and which industries may not perceive themselves to be prepared. So one of the great things about the Talent Nation data is at the industry level, able to observe which industries believe that their own industry needed to do much more to meet the upcoming ASRS reporting requirements. And so there was quite a disconnect when we looked at industries across the country, where we found certainly some industries that were well prepared, and the surveys of those organizations about their preparedness suggested that they knew that they were prepared, was certainly the case. and that was the case in telecommunications sector. But there were some sectors where we saw completely the opposite, where you've got organized industries where they thought they were very well prepared, but they weren't, and we had industries where they were very well prepared and they weren't. And so I'll ask Naomi, who's just got the control panel, just to move on to a matrix graph we've got in a couple of slides after this, where essentially what we're doing here is we're looking on the left side, we're looking at whether industries are prepared, and on the bottom axis, we're looking at whether their perceived preparedness. So some industries where we're able to observe are not prepared or as prepared as the broader economy, but certainly thought they may have been prepared. We identified retail sector, the mining sector, and the transport sector as quite high up on that. Some sectors, like the professional services and technology sectors, are very well prepared and think they're not prepared. So the whole illusion of your consultant or auditor always fretting about more to do certainly was the case when we looked broadly across the industry as well. I might just stop there in terms of the insights that I was going to cover. There's quite a broad range of insights that the report unpicks, and I certainly encourage you offline to look into them. I know Terence has organised some questions for some of the broader team to unpick their thoughts and feedback on what we observed in the report as well. So I'll hand it over to you, Terence.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Nick. As Nick said, if you've got questions, please submit them through the Q&A function, and I'll pick up on those as well. But I might kick off with some questions. Rich, as you know, you've been sort of looking at the sustainable industry for some time, as Nick mentioned, and you've been, I guess, benchmarking remuneration and so on. You personally know lots and lots of sustainability people and have placed them in their roles. The statistic around 75% of Group 1 companies having a sustainability person, and that people who teams that have a sustainability person are much better prepared, must be really rewarding for you to see, but also all the people in your network and my network. So that was interesting. But just, I guess, going into one of the points from the report, does the report's view that climate reporting maturity is fundamentally an organizational capability challenge, that's the report's view, match what you've seen in practice?
Thanks, Terence. Yeah, we've been talking about this stuff quite a long time now, and I think when we first started, we both had different coloured hair. But yeah, I think it's a great report, and pulling out the insights. I think that organisational capability challenge is a key piece, and one of the issues at the moment is it's hard to report on what you don't understand. And the new standards in place, and it won't be until the first round of reporting comes through and is completed that we won't have a clear understanding of what's required. We've been seeing assurers within the same firms with differing views in terms of what's required. So it's definitely a moving target at the moment. Saying that, the survey Nick mentioned covers about 1,500 people a year, and climate change, net zero strategy, reporting, disclosures, and environmental compliance are the top priorities for practitioners. So it is front of mind. But we've also seen some complacency there. And Nick, your last point of the key findings, where you've got industries with the heaviest environmental compliance show lower than average preparedness, is I guess something that we've seen for the last couple of years, where the leaders in sustainability have almost showed that complacency in terms of going, okay, well, we've been ahead of the curve, and so they've taken quite a relaxed view, and I guess have dropped some of that capability and capacity. So, where we do see that capability, organisations are resource constrained, and you've got 74% of Group 1 have sustainability practitioners. I think where it's really going to be telling is as we move into that Group 2 phase, where there isn't that sustainability person in there, and you've got people in the organisation with no exposure to this, no previous exposure to the likes of Engers or TCFD. that's where we're really going to start to see that capability gap come to play.
Thanks, Rich. Karen, one of the more striking insights in the report is that self-reported preparedness doesn't match observed reporting maturity in more than half the industries. Why do you think there's a gap, and how should boards and executive teams test whether their organization's genuinely ready for reporting?
Yeah, thanks, Terence. And I guess, and maybe it's a sort of auditor in me as well, but obviously unpacking where the data is sort of coming from. I guess the assessment of reporting maturity is really coming from what entities have previously publicly reported, whether they've used frameworks, whether they've had assurance. And we do know that voluntary reporting is typically more prevalent in the listed entities, and also probably in those sectors that are more likely to be affected by climate change. The sectors that we saw a lot of the voluntary reporting was in those sorts of areas. When we look at Group 1 as a whole, we've got a very high proportion of unlisted entities, whether they're domestic, unlisted, or whether they are subsidiaries of overseas type of headquartered companies. We've got a very high proportion of those. So I think that's sort of overall, just we've got to look at the sort of audience and in terms of the population that we're looking at here. I think no doubt that existing reporting maturity, and I think as Nick said, is a very strong indication of current capacity and capability. You've got people who know how to do sustainability reporting. They've pulled together information of various sorts, and that's going to be really critical for that implementation. But as Richard pointed out, IFRS S2 is a new framework for everybody. So we know that nobody's actually really done it before. There's been a few trial runs I know that sort of happened for June, but principally speaking, we haven't had the reports going out there until those first ones come through in December. So, and those who were reporting using frameworks before would have been using the multitude of different reports that were out there and frameworks. And I think I would definitely say some of those existing reporting frameworks are going to make it easier for entities to transition to IFRS S2, like TCFD, than others. And that's certainly something that we're hearing already. Some who were using other types of sustainability frameworks are finding the transition to S2 harder than those. But even then, I will say that those who were doing TCFD, and you've probably seen it too, Terence, as well, the step up to IFRS S2 is quite significant. And I think sort of entities, definitely broadly speaking, everyone is underestimating what is going to be needed to do a quality IFRS S2 report. So I think these, the insights that we've got here, which is perhaps just broadly, there is perhaps a potential underestimation of what's needed. And that's certainly what we're hearing anecdotally as well out there in the marketplace. It is taking more than was needed, that if you're in the Group 2 and Group 3, you're generally less mature in your reporting already. And as Richard was saying, you haven't got those dedicated sustainability resources there. You've got less resources available, which was one of the reasons they were given a longer lead time anyway. I think, and obviously if they're hearing that larger entities are underestimating what's needed, they really need to, get on and get started, because if the large entities are underestimating this, then there's a pretty good chance Group 2s and Group 3s will be. And in fact, I suspect a lot of them probably are. In terms of how to approach it, look, many entities are probably undertaking a gap analysis, looking at what information they do have, what information is lacking, and then I guess planning how they might source or develop those gaps, having a bit of a roadmap through for that. So as boards and executives, they've really got to understand where those gaps are, but also critically, I think the level of capability and capacity in the organisation. If you haven't got people who actually understand what the requirements are and what's needed, then is that gap assessment going to be worth anything if they aren't really sure of what they're doing, or actually the assessment of the work that's going to be needed? So certainly, I think these early reports are actually really valuable for us to for entities to look at it and say, okay, this is the kind of thing that needs to be put out. How do we actually build something of that ourselves? Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. And I think in addition to what you said about, I guess, Group 1 and Group 2 and then Group 3, the other sort of anecdotal feedback, and Nick and I have been meeting with lots and lots of Group 1 companies over the last 6 months, just getting some insights into what's happening in practice and whether that confirms some of the research findings that we've been working on. I guess the majority of them in Group 1 are saying to us that they're ending up with a longer list of work to do and priority focus areas for year 2 compared to year 1, partly because they've had to rush at this, partly because only 4 metrics are being assured, whereas everything's going to be assured next year, and partly because I think they're seeing what others are reporting and starting to add that to their list. So I think there's also that uplift. And I think one of the statistics in the report is around companies saying they're looking to increase their sustainability teams, and a third of the companies that we looked at, I think, are saying that. So that's also going to be something to watch. I might go to Rich. Rich, in terms of, I guess, hiring, getting to that point, if businesses are less prepared and still not hiring more, and that's probably the other two-thirds in that graph, is it because they don't understand how complex this reporting is, or have they got other priorities?
I think it's a combination of the two, Terence. I think a good indication of their understanding is when we get companies come to us and say we want people with existing ASRS experience, so they need to have done this before. So that's a pretty clear signal that they actually don't even understand the standards. They don't understand that it's new coming in. So and even now, we're seeing Group 1 entities at a financial year end that have still not got things sorted. They're looking at what they need to do. So grossly underprepared, and will be a scramble. And I guess, like you said, Terence, the long list will be quite long for next year. So there's the understanding piece, but also it's been pushed down the priority list. If we look at, I think you only need to turn on your TV to see what's going on in the world, and the economic pressures have pushed these things down the list. The irony is that, I guess, by not resourcing up and not getting on top of it earlier, their expenditure is going to go through the roof. And I reflect back kind of 3-4 years ago when the market was really strong, and a lot of the consultancies were doubling their fees because they just did not have the capacity to deliver and didn't want to actually win the work, but were winning it anyway. And so, fees will jump. Consultancies are already stretched. It's really hard to get that capability to come in, and often, the pre-work hasn't been done as well in terms of that data integrity. And I guess that's where this conversation is really important, because without that data integrity, you've missed that first step. So I think we're seeing organizations that have delayed hiring and are now trying to hire into the space. They're paying a premium for people coming on board, and people with relatively few years of experience behind them.
Thanks, Rich. There's a follow-up question from Clayton, who used to be for a short while at Net Balance with me, which is, are you seeing an uptick in temporary sustainability manager roles for those in Group 2 and 3 companies who are not yet sure about whether there's a full-time or permanent role?
Not so much in the Group 2 and 3 at this stage. So we are. It tends to be more Group 1 that need help with that ASRS readiness. To my mind, so I guess I look at the flow of events. So it's probably the consultancies, and I guess, Terence, in your role with Foresight, you would probably see this. So the consultants tend to be busier first because you scope out exactly what's required, and then we will see the roles start to come through. So the low risk scenario for a lot of organizations is to get a consultant in to help with that pre-work. I guess where we've seen a lot of the short-term engagements has been for Group 1, where they have an idea of what they need, or they recognise that they are under the pump. They can't get access to those consulting resources, or they need someone in-house for 6 to 12 months to really help them get them through that piece. But my prediction is over the next 6 months, we'll start to see more of those short-term engagements come through for Group 2 and Group 3.
Great. Thanks, Richard. And I might just encourage people to use the Q&A function rather than the chat function to put in questions. So I might just go to Karen on collaboration. So we're obviously counting in this research people who've got some sort of sustainability part to their title. But as we know, it's been a collaborative exercise amongst many functions. How important, Karen, your sort of deliberations in the profession is collaboration between sustainability, finance, governance, and so on to ensure that companies are successful in these disclosures.
Yeah, look, I think collaboration is now really fundamental, and as was reflected to me just this week, really, I guess sustainability reporting or financial reporting were previously just sort of handled by the one team on their own, probably in isolation from the rest of the organisation. And certainly the reflection from someone from a reporting entity this week was, mandatory reporting in line with IFRS S2 is now a whole of organisation approach. They were just saying, and as you say, it's sustainability, finance, it's governance, it's risk, it's legal, it's procurement, it's across the whole organization. It's going to be no one team can do it alone. Each of the teams, they will need to bring their particular expertise, their knowledge, their skill set to the whole sort of project. So of course, when you say that, then you've got all these different people. You've got to make sure you've got very clear roles and responsibilities outlined, and you've got very clear ownership within the organization to make sure things don't get missed in the piece. I think then as also I just highlighted, as Rich was just saying, I think when we get into the sort of the smaller entities, and I hate to say small, but groups 2 and groups 3 with less resources, clearly they don't have, we know they're not going to have the same volume of sustainability capability there. So they're going to be far more relying on their existing team members to build this into their current roles, certainly initially. And while they sort of identify the skills and resources that they need, and I think as Richard was saying, that's sometimes the role of consultants to help build some of that. But I think it is incredibly challenging because we're looking at these existing team members who might be in finance or governance or procurement and they've somehow got to squeeze, how do I build my knowledge and capability in IFRS S2 and what's required, and also get around doing some of the work that's actually going to be needed. So there's no doubt that is going to be incredibly challenging. And I think the other piece, just to say over the top, is I think that often gets mixed is the governance of all of this as well. So we've actually got to build the capability and capacity at the board level too, and you've got to bring them on the whole journey. You can't just take, in a way, I guess, as the financials happens, you get to them at the end of the year and go, here's the financials for approval. But they have had the whole budget and they've had the monthly financials coming through to them. So it's not a complete surprise. But I think what we're seeing a little bit with some of the sustainability disclosures is missing that iterative piece throughout and trying to sort of do a lot of it in one stage. So it's not just the organization who's got to be involved in that process, but actually at that governance level as well. And they're going to need to build their skills and capacity as well. So it's definitely a big collaborative approach. And I think anyone who tries to say one team's going to be doing it on their own is definitely very optimistic, I think.
Aaron, there's a follow-up question from Olivia Tyler and also someone else, which I'll link through. Given AASB S2 is an accounting framework, are we actually seeing finance teams? And the other question that I had was risk teams gearing up themselves with newer or varied skill sets, so continuous professional development, rather than still relying on sustainability teams to do much of the heavy lifting. And I think that there's also a question around the CANZ Sustainability Climate Disclosure course. So this might be an opportunity for you to plug your course, Karen.
Thanks, Terence. Yeah, no, so I think the answer is, look, we are seeing finance teams building their expertise. In a lot of organizations, that ultimate ownership responsibility for the reporting is moving under the CFO. It's not everybody. Everybody's got different structures, I would say, but we are seeing a vast majority probably moving to that CFO responsibility because they lead the external reporting project, I guess, more broadly in process, and it feeds up into the audit and risk and into the board. So it's leveraging some of those existing channels. So that very much brings the finance areas, and particularly those involved in external reporting in finance, into the mix. Now, they're not going to suddenly overnight become experts in developing transition plans, in measuring emissions, but they are building their understanding and their knowledge in these areas, and they're leveraging their existing skill sets that they have around actually ensuring that there is an evidence basis for the disclosures, that things have been documented, that there actually is a process around it, and that the standard requirements, and obviously someone's pointed out that it's been AASB S2 has been written in the form of a of an accounting standard. So there are requirements, they use a similar language and structure, and that's something that they're familiar with, and same along the lines of materiality and so forth. So I think we are certainly seeing them building that knowledge and understanding, and they're certainly applying it to these areas. And that's where we're very much seeing this collaborative approach across all of the teams, because everyone needs to bring their various expertise into these disclosures. And I did see someone was commenting, and it's not just compliance. And of course, it isn't just compliance at all. There certainly is far more to these disclosures than compliance. But I think what we're hearing very strongly is in year one, for entities who perhaps were not well onto this voluntary journey and leading, then they're just trying to get what they can do done, because as been indicated, there's probably a bit of a greater uplift than people were expecting in terms of what was actually needed. So let's just get what we need to do done. And then, as you say, in year 2 and year 3, that's when we can start to actually build and expand on the disclosures far more. So certainly it's definitely a maturity and an evolution over time. We're not going to see the same reports coming out year after year at all. And I think that's something that's really important to note as well.
Thanks, Karen. I'm going to put the link to the course on the chat for everyone.
Oh, I forgot to give my own plug.
I know. So.
No, thank you. Yes, and we do have a lot of training out there, and it's not just available for accountants, I should say as well. So there's heaps of material out there in terms of micro courses or broader certificates. And I know, Terence, you're involved in some of our certificate as well, but I think there's quite a lot out there. And also, just as a general plug, the AASB and ASIC have got a lot of material out as well that they've been doing to support the implementation. Probably the AASB has done more than they've probably done for a lot of standards in the past. So there's no shortage of resources and information out there from various different areas.
Thanks, Karen. Nick, I might go to you for a question. The report revealed industries using ESG platforms for data capture, around 56%. They're showing stronger preparedness, while people who don't have platforms are less prepared. From a technical reporting perspective, why do systems and data governance become so important as reporting moves towards assurance, particularly reasonable assurance? And I know a lot of conversations around these when we've met clients from industry. Nick.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with it, and so in the interest of time, I'll try and keep my response relatively short. But yeah, I always think about just the framing of it as if you could imagine Telstra did a market announcement and said that their annual report was done through spreadsheets, or their financial report was done through spreadsheets, where they kind of, due to the market and their share price, we're kind of dealing with this with at least one level of equivalent complexity, right, in terms of our GHG and otherwise reporting. But then the next step is that, of course, ASRS, let's not fool ourselves, is I'll say it and I'll keep saying it, much more complex in some areas than regular financial reporting, in particular in its requirement to understand the value chain. It's unparalleled. And then needing to get audited on that requires an organization to not only have the ability to have confidence, moving towards reasonable assurance as well, of things that they are not captured within their own internal systems, but rather on their external environments, such as their suppliers and customers, even from a climate risk standpoint, but of course scope 3 as well, is another level which just kind of makes the need for ensuring your processes and systems can be tracked from a control standpoint imperative. But also the way I think about it is, I guess the interesting question we have that keeps coming up is, like, well, when do you make the move? Because a lot of organizations are trying to get across a lot of these subject matters, whilst at the same time trying to understand when and what kind of capital investment do they need to make outside of the people question, because of course they all relate. And so the way that I think about it, of course, is you need the most accurate disclosures first and foremost. And so if there is a way, and this sounds like we're talking our book, but it's certainly what we believe, if there's a way to prioritize the data you need, that should come before the system. And then, of course, if you can do both at the same time, which is then the efficiency measure, which is how are all those systems speaking to each other. Now, we know a lot of organizations have their own systems. They won't be using a climate system or a carbon accounting system independently of their own system. It'll be their own system. Some will have multiple systems. Whatever it is, you've just got to make sure you're getting the right data. And one of the things that I think is quite worrying, and obviously Terence, and some of the team on the call as part of the Monash Collective that we've been building, we've been monitoring all companies that have published or submitted their ASRS reports. And we're observing what the data looks like, not just for listed businesses, but private businesses as well, of which there's more, mind you. And the disparity in reporting, and I guess not the averages, but the gaps in terms of different aspects of the reporting are so wide that it tells us businesses are obviously going through a transition and evolving, and we'll be learning more and more. That's going to be even starker in year 2 when reasonable assurance catapults to everything else. Scope 3 gets included, and then year 3, Scope 3 has to be reasonably assured as well. And so the way that I think about it is, if you're waiting for the right time, make sure you've got the accuracy in place, but also don't make sure you're waiting for the right time for too long, because you can wait forever and you're going to create a lot of pain throughout the next few years. Things aren't going to be perfect. Shoot the trigger on having the right systems and people in place from now, and continue to learn and invest over the coming years.
Can I just chime in quickly there, Terence? Just
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting that like your comments there, Nick, because the Sustainability Leaders Conference a couple of weeks ago, certainly a lot of the talk in the sessions outside was around the reliability of some of the platforms that organisations had in place for some time, and they're actually pulling all the information out and putting it into Excel to check it. So it's that, like you say, it's that quality of the data, and potentially they went too early in terms of putting the systems in place and didn't have the foundations there. So that data governance piece is really critical, and it's not until they're starting to come to the crunch that they're actually realising that there's gaps in there. So it was an interesting observation through those sessions that people were going, we've invested, but we're actually having to check it. So we're having to pull it out and check it and then put it back in again.
Yeah, absolutely. And the auditors are telling them what questions they should be asking, and that's appropriate. And there's, I guess, a lot of systems that have been come out that have launched and organizations are using, and many of them earnest as well, that operate as if it's a black box. The credit bureau industry operates like a black box a little bit here and there. A lot of the KYC industry, know your customer industry, where there's counterparty intelligence being provided on anti-money laundering and a whole bunch more, operate as a bit of a black box. We can't get away with it in our industry because you have to get audited on the use of the data. Organizations don't widely have to get audited on their use of credit data, but they will on sustainability data. And so, it is very much a feature of our industry, and the way that this report is coming to be, that you've got to be making sure you've got complete data taxonomies or everything you need in order to understand every measure that's coming to your system from an external one, what the history of it is.
Thanks both. I was just going to make one additional point to all of that, which is that when we do move to reasonable assurance in year 4, the reasonable assurance ideally is focused on controls testing rather than checking everything. So systems with controls in place, you're going to benefit from, and that sort of goes back to Richard's point around going too early with the data system and not really one that potentially serves reasonable assurance. So there's lots to work through, and this is why there's a longer list of work between years 1 and 2 for Group 1 companies. I've got one question here. I might go to Karen with this, which I think in your interactions with the smaller and medium-sized market, Karen, I'm a sustainability lead at a Group 3 company in professional services. What are some of the things we should prioritize to prepare for our first report?
Yeah, thanks, Terence, and thanks for the question, Saad. But so I think what we're seeing entities do, certainly one of the strong areas is doing a kind of a gap analysis, looking at what the standards require, looking at what you've already got and where you need to head to. As you start, obviously building that capacity and knowledge, because you actually need to have a good understanding. And as a sustainability lead, you probably do have a fairly solid understanding, but you'd be amazed at how many people haven't even read the standard, and yet they're looking at it. And I know it's dry, I know it's long, but it is actually a necessity to actually read it, read the appendices, entities as well, because there's a lot of important insights there around actually how you would apply the key requirements. So I'd certainly say that's a fundamental, but obviously looking then and going and say, what do we have, what do we not have? Certainly looking at what's going to take the time to develop, I think, and starting a roadmap for that first. And also some of what's the fundamental. There is a bit of an order you need to do some of these things in terms of actually thinking about actually the risk identification, the scenario analysis. You can't sort of get to some of the later things without some of that parts of the process. And then also, I think the other thing that we certainly encourage entities to start early is the greenhouse gas emissions and getting going on those scope 1s and 2s, because that does take a bit of time to actually work out where they are coming from and start to build some of that data and information coming through. We do have, and our funders report, we did do we put out a bit of a roadmap to help group 2 and 3 entities plan. It was put out probably now coming up to 2 years ago now. So I'll put that in, but obviously if you're a group 3, you've lost a bit of time in terms of that preparation, but I'd certainly have a look at that in terms of some of the stages and perhaps the ordering of getting some of that work done. Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's a good point in terms of reading the standard. Karen, there's lots of confusion about things. One in particular that I think is easily confused is that the standard says scenario analysis needs to be done when variables change or corporate planning is done, not necessarily annually. But the standard also says the business resilience assessment needs to be done annually. And because scenario analysis is used in business resilience, there's a bit of confusion around when to do that. So again, planning these things as you're preparing your first set of disclosure is really important, because that's you're going to come back to this annually. I might go to each of you just for a last question around looking ahead. What do the next couple of years look like for reporting organizations? I might start with Nick and then Karen and Richard.
Sorry, Terence, what was the question?
Looking ahead, what does the next few years look like for reporting organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think at risk of saying what I was saying earlier, I think people need to, certainly what we're observing is that this is a process. So obviously Terence and I have done many meetings over the last 2 quarters on behalf of some of the research that we've been doing and meeting with corporates, and we're collecting really interesting insights. And one of the ones that occurred this quarter is businesses that have just published are starting the work for next year. And the work is twice as much in terms of what they're mapping out, the layers in the roadmap that they have to, and the milestones they have to achieve along the way. Not just the inclusion of scope 3, of course, but probably even just as much the inclusion of reasonable assurance over the rest of it, and the need to go deeper on certain elements. And that's been really interesting over the last 2 months, Terence, having meetings with people on that, as we've discussed, and seeing how quickly they have to move into next year mode. Tells me that yeah, this is it's kind of like that first mile of a 5-mile, right? Like it's going to get more painful, but midway through that, 3/4 of the way through is when it'll get easier, and we're not there yet. So it's going to continue to evolve, and it's going to require your executive to understand there's going to be continual and gradual investment increases to move from essentially ultimately a setup model, getting the consultants, the data and the tech and the people that you need to set up, transitioning that to an ongoing model, but doing that as well as setting up for the next year, and having foot to pedal and brake.
Thanks, Nick. Karen, what are your thoughts? And also maybe touching on the report covered, report asked the question about, well, what are the other areas that you're thinking about? And really the answer was disclosure. Very few industries saying nature or broader sustainability issues. What are you hearing?
Look, I think I build on Nick's point, but I guess to what I said earlier as well, it's not a set and forget with this reporting. Year 1 reports will look different to year 3 to year 5. So, and that's not just because there are different disclosure, that there are some transitional things for like scope 3 that will come in year 2. There's different levels of assurance. There is actually an expectation that entities will evolve and build maturity and actually become more granular and more sophisticated in some of the work that they're doing. So there are some obviously mechanisms in the standards around proportionality if you don't have the sort of capability or resources, but there is an expectation that that will gradually build. You can't just keep saying we still don't have any, understanding in the organization year after year. That's not going to sort of cut it going through. I also think it's important to note that the assurance that we're seeing in Australia with the 5,000 and limited assurance building to reasonable is quite a bit different from what entities might have experienced in the past, where they, if they've had voluntary assurance, the way the standard is applied is going to feel far more rigorous, which is where I mentioned the need to document, disclose, have evidence, and that is something that I think entities can't really sort of overlook. In terms of what's next, the ISSB will be releasing something in relation to nature-related disclosures, probably in the final quarter of this year for exposure. So globally, things are moving on. They've also got their project on human capital. I think what's important to note is whatever comes about nature is not going to be a bolt-on to what we have on climate. It's going to require the use of S1, which is the broader sustainability reporting standard. You're not just going to be able to take anything they put out on nature without looking at that more broadly. And what we expect is that, Treasury have said that they'll be reviewing the legislation in 28, 29, I think. And our hope is that at that point, they will start to think about what, they've been very clear it was climate first, but not climate only. I think what I'm hearing from entities now is they'd like a bit of an indication of what else is coming and when. I know at the moment everyone's head is very much in climate, and I think there's no doubt about that for the next couple of years. But equally, they are starting to, even if you're saying, each year there's more and more stuff to do, they need to know what's coming down the pipeline so they can start to actually plan accordingly, build the resourcing and the capability and the understanding, and they don't want to be caught short because it suddenly comes in. And I think that's probably where it's coming from, but I think that sort of signal there is a hope that they will start to get a bit of a signal for when Australia moves beyond the climate only perspective, or climate first, shall I say. So yeah, that's certainly a key thing. And I'd say that the key message is, if you haven't started now, start. You need to really get moving, and you need to start by building your knowledge and understanding. Just because you don't have to report because you're Group 3 for another, start reporting periods in what someone said, it was only 15 months till Group 3 start their reporting period. So it's not that long. But the whole point that they were given that lead time was because they need it, because they can't just turn it over in 6 months. Not that I think many Group 1s could, but some of them have had to. But I think, yeah, for Group 3, you're going to need that time. Don't waste it. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Richard, your view, but also I'm curious to know, just in terms of, well, what do the next 2 to 3 years look like, but also what do the next 2 to 3 years of pipeline look like for those companies that are needing sustainability people? Where do they come from? Do they come from the larger professional services teams that are out there? Do they come from some of the assurance providers? Where do you think they're going to come from?
Thanks, Terence. Yeah, okay, I'll touch on that, but I guess I was keen to look at that practitioner lens as well for the next couple of years. But certainly, resources are going to continue to be scarce in the space for the next couple of years. So, and what we're seeing is people are moving from consultancies to in-house roles. So they've got a couple of years' experience under their belt. They've maybe worked on a Group 1 report, and then they're being, I guess, poached in-house by clients, which is fine, but it's also creating challenges as well, because they're being thrust into situations where they're having to deal with the board, deal with the executive, and they haven't had that exposure before. I guess what I'm seeing over the next couple of years is, at the moment we are up to our eyeballs in compliance. And for those that love reporting and assurance, I love you. You're great people. Well done. But for the majority of people that are in the sustainability space, it's not necessarily what they signed up for. So we are starting to see some organisations look at, well, what's beyond year one. And again, it matches with what you've been saying, Terence, around, it's only going to get more complex. So we're seeing organisations that I would have traditionally looked at as more of a laggard in the space, hiring people into roles to go, okay, what does the next 2 to 3 years look like? Because we're going to need to get our suppliers on board, and we've got thousands of suppliers. And if we go to them and ask for their emissions, then they're not going to know what to do. So actually starting to build programs, engaging across the organisation. So the roles will start to get a bit more interesting again, and out of that grind, we go, okay, what do we need to do to keep ourselves out of the firing line? So from a practitioner perspective, I think things will start to improve from that perspective. Also, to Karen's point around other things coming in, we're seeing with some organisations, if they've got climate under control, or they feel like they've got climate under control, they are actually taking a breath and looking at, okay, well, we haven't actually looked at our human rights due diligence, or so they're actually starting to take some air and look at what's been parked for the last couple of years. So I think it'll still be a scramble for the next 6 to 9, maybe 12 months. But then we'll start to see organisations come up for air. We'll start to see those roadmaps being put in place. People don't want to go through this process again and feeling under the pump. So we will start to see that planning and more of a proactive approach.
Hey, Terence, I
Thanks,
might jump
Richard.
in there. I'm under strict instructions to make sure a couple of things happen before we end up wrapping up today. And one of them, of course, is I want to give a massive plug to the work that Talent Nation do on their annual sustainability survey. The report is widely read. I get a lot of incoming notes every time it's out or it's about to come out saying, do you know what it's going to say? Of course, it's got some really critical insights on remuneration, but also more broadly how the industry's evolving and the outlook of it. So really encourage businesses to everyone to go and seek that out if they haven't already, and or participate in the survey next year. I understand Richard might be launching a TikTok profile over the coming quarter as well. So if that's the case, we'll make sure that we get that link out to everyone and encourage you all to follow Richard on TikTok.
Please hold your breath.
I want to thank Karen and Terence and Richard, of course, for today, and obviously all the work with Talent Nation as well in co-authoring. CA have some incredible courses and issue some great research in this space. If you're a finance professional thinking about how to upskill in sustainability, if you're a sustainability professional thinking about how to upskill in finance, I was told sustainability is their best or second most popular module over the last couple of years. CA is very big, so that's a big thing in terms of volume of interest in the space. So thank you very much, Karen, for the work you do and participating today. A recording of today's webinar will be on the YouTube channel, the Purpose Bureau YouTube channel, but we'll of course share a recording via email out as well. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a lovely day.